very warm welcome to all of you. So it is indeed a pleasure to welcome Dr. Shankar Rajaraman for today's lecture. Dr. Shankar is a psychiatrist by training and a Sanskrit poet by passion. His interests include Sanskrit literature, Indian aesthetics, and Indian psychology. Shankar Rajaraman is a postdoctoral fellow with the NIAS Consciousness Studies program. He holds an MBBS degree from Bangalore University and a postgraduate diploma in psychiatry from the Rajiv Gandhi University of Health Sciences. He also has an MA in Sanskrit with the gold medal and an MSc in psychology, both from the Karnataka State Open University, Mysore. He secured his PhD in psychology from the University of Mysore on the topic, A Qualitative Approach to the Psychology of Three Self-Conscious Emotions from Sanskrit Poetics. He is a recipient of the prestigious Badarayan Vyas Samman from the President of India for his contribution to Sanskrit language and literature. He has also been conferred with the Professor M. Hiriyanna Sanskrit Works Award for the Best Sanskrit Poet of the year 2013 and the Bananji Award 2017 for his contributions to Sanskrit. So he is indeed a very eminent scholar of Sanskrit, and also he is our secret pride. So we welcome you, Dr. Shankar, to give us a lecture on the educational aspects of literature, which is often overlooked. So a very warm welcome to you, Dr. Shankar, and to all of you. Over to you, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, Niharika. Thank you, Meera, for introducing me. And a warm welcome to all of you. I have titled the talk for today as Literature as Pedagogy, Insights from Indian Aesthetics. I have a PPT presentation to make, and I request Niharika to share the PPT, please. Yeah. If you can go to the first, the next slide. So before discussing the topic for today, let me give a background, a brief introduction to Indian aesthetics. So by Indian aesthetics, I mean predominantly Sanskrit aesthetics. And the technical word for aesthetics in Sanskrit is Alankara Shastra. Alankara basically refers to figures of speech, but that term has been traditionally accepted as the term for aesthetics as a whole, and therefore it's called Alankara Shastra. The origins of Alankara Shastra lie in dramaturgy, that is Natya Shastra specifically. Bharata's work called Natya Shastra. Bharata, as many of you might be knowing, supposed to have he's called Bharata Muni, and he's supposed to have lived somewhere between the 2nd century BC and the 2nd century AD. It's often disputed whether Natya Shastra is the work of a single person or a group of persons, but for the sake of this talk, let us not go into those polemics and accept Bharata as the author of Natya Shastra. It's a voluminous text of 36 chapters dealing with several aspects of dramaturgy. After Bharata, we have a continuous tradition of more than 2 millennia and 2 millennia of work on Alankara Shastra, and we have, even to this day, there are scholars who are writing primary works in Sanskrit on Alankara Shastra, couple of them. The recent, the most famous recent Alankara Shastrajna aesthetician would be Jagannatha Pandita. But then we have a series of authors starting from Bharata. Then we have Bhamaha, who wrote Kavya Alankara, Dandi, the author of Kavya Darsha, Anandavardhana, the author of the path-breaking work Dhanyaloka, Kuntaka of Vakrokti Jivita fame, Dhananjaya, who wrote Dasharupaka on the different classifications of drama. We have Abhinav Gupta, who is also a great philosopher. He has written the Abhinav Bharati commentary on Bharata's Natya Shastra. Then we have Bhoja, who has 2 voluminous works, Saraswati Kantabharana and Shringara Prakasha. Then Rupa Goswami, who comes from the Gaudiya Vaishnava Parampara and who has written Ujjvala Neelamani, and also another work on Alankara Shastra. Then we have Jagannatha Pandita, who is the author of Rasa Gangadhara. Then coming to the main concerns of Alankara Shastra. Alankara Shastra is mainly concerned with establishing parameters for analyzing literature. That is its main concern. But there is also another concern of Alankara Shastra, which is to understand the connoisseur's response to literature or kavya, which kavya is a very broad term. It's a translation of literature, but you have several subdivisions of kavya. Main subdivision are Shravya Kavya and Drishya Kavya. Shravya Kavya is literature that is read, and Drishya Kavya is literature that is performed in the form of drama. So coming to the next slide. Yeah. Discussing the prayojana of literature, that is the benefits of literature. We have one aesthetician, Mammata, who wrote Kavya Prakasha and who lived in the 11th century AD, saying this in one of his opening verses: Kavyam yashase arthakrite vyavahara vide shivetarakshateye sadyah paranirvritaye kanta sammitatayopadeshayuje. So these are the various benefits of literature that Mammata lists: fame, wealth, solution to misfortune. Fame, as in the case of Kalidasa; wealth, as in the case of Dhanika, who is said to have written the work Ratnavali, that play Ratnavali, and gifted it to Harsha, who is supposed to have showered a lot of wealth on him. Then we have Mayura, who wrote Surya Shataka, as well as we have the well-known example of Narayana Bhattatiri, who wrote Narayaniyam, and both are supposed to have been freed of their misfortune in the form of certain bodily ailments by writing their poems. So these three benefits are benefits that accrue basically to the poet, and also these may not apply to each and every case. However, there are other benefits which apply to the poet sometimes, but basically to the reader. The three other benefits are, which I have marked in yellow in the verse: Vyavahara, Sadhya Paranirvriti, and Upadesha. So Vyavahara is information about the society, the members of the society, and their functions. That is Vyavahara. Then we have Sadhya Paranirvriti, which is experience of supreme joy then and there. Sadhya is then and there. Para is supreme, and Nirvriti is joy. So often aesthetic joy is compared to supreme joy, the joy of, it's called as Brahmananda Sahodara, a twin brother of Brahmananda, the joy of yogis. Then we have Upadesha, which is education about how to lead life. So these are things that we'll be dwelling upon in detail in the slides that come. So experience of supreme joy then and there, that is Sadhya Paranirvriti, is something which which is a benefit both to the poet and the reader, whereas the other two are basically to the reader. So coming to the next slide. So from the previous slide, we could basically list two broad aims of literature, which are providing aesthetic joy, that is rasa, and education, Vyutpatti. So many of you might have heard the word rasa, but not many have heard of the word Vyutpatti, which basically goes to show that rasa has dominated the discourse on Indian aesthetics, and Vyutpatti is often relegated to a second position. And this is not so just in modern times, but even traditionally, many scholars have relegated Vyutpatti to a second position, and often have spoken in demeaning terms about Vyutpatti in comparison to rasa. So for example, we have a verse by Dhananjaya, and Dhananjaya, who wrote the Dasharupaka, who lived in the 10th century, and a commentary on that verse by his brother Dhanika in the commentary Avaloka. So this is a verse that occurs quite in the very beginning of the Dasharupaka. So coming to the next slide. So I'll just read out the verse and its translation. Ananda nisyandishu rupakeshu vyutpatti matram phalamalpa buddhihi yopitihasadi vadaha tasmai namaswadu paranmukhaya. So it's the 6th verse in the first chapter. So it occurs quite in the beginning of the work Dasharupaka. So to translate it, a big salute to the well-intentioned but ignorant killjoy who says the goal of drama, which is dripping with unalloyed bliss, is merely education, just as it is in the case of the Itihasa. By Itihasa, we refer to Ramayana and Mahabharata. These are legendary narratives. So he calls such a person who says Vyutpatti is equally important as a killjoy, or Vyutpatti is important. So such a person is called as a killjoy. So Alpa Buddhi, who is sadhu but alpa buddhi. Sadhu means well-intentioned, but alpa buddhi, ignorant. And he is a killjoy because he thinks Vyutpatti is of importance, whereas it is rasa that is of prime importance in any kavya. So coming to the next slide. So you have the commentary on this verse by Dhanika, who also has disdain to such a view that Vyutpatti is important. Tatra kechit dharma artha kama moksheshu vaichakshanyam kalasu cha karoti kirtim pritim cha sadhukavya nishevanam ityadina trivargadi vyutpattim kavya phalatvena icchanti tan nirasena swasamvedyah paramananda rupo rasaswado dasharupanam phalam na punar itihasavat trivargadi vyutpatti matram iti darshitam. So to translate it, some say the relishing of a good piece of literature brings in its wake the following benefits. And what are the benefits? Proficiency in the fourfold life goals, which are dharma, artha, kama, and moksha, which shall be described below in the next slide, as well as in the fine arts, kalasu, fame, that is kirti, and joy, that is priti. Thereby, they desire to make knowledge of the three mundane goals, dharma, artha, and kama, and so on, the principal aim of literature. The author, that is Dhananjaya, by way of quashing this claim, shows us that the aim of drama is the self-referential experience of aesthetic relish, which is of the nature of supreme bliss. And it is not just the knowledge of the three mundane goals, dharma, artha, kama, and the like, as in the case of Itihasa. So we see with what disdain both Dhananjaya as well as Dhanika speak as regards the Vyutpatti as a goal of literature. Coming to the, with this background, let me come to the focus of today's talk. So though one cannot deny the significance of rasa as a preeminent aim of drama and literature, it is possible to do so without undermining Vyutpatti. So to that end, we shall explore the following questions in this talk. Nature of Vyutpatti. So what do we learn from literature? And the mode of its production. How is Vyutpatti produced? How do we learn what we learn? And the third question, and which I think is the most important question, its relationship with rasa. How are the recreational and the educational aspects of literature interrelated? Is there any relation at all between these two goals? And while we discuss these questions, we also assess the importance of Vyutpatti as a legitimate and a non-trivial aim of literature. So coming to the next slide. So what is the nature of Vyutpatti? So that is the first question we asked. And according to Sanskrit aestheticians, literature teaches us predominantly about the fourfold goals, as have already been mentioned, fourfold goals of human life, which are called as Purushartha or Chaturvarga. And these goals are goals that are conceptualized in the Indian tradition. And literature not just teaches us about these fourfold goals, it also teaches us about the proper means for attaining them. And what are these fourfold goals? The Purusharthas or the Chaturvarga, Artha, Kama, Dharma, and Moksha, as many of you know. So Artha is the acquisition of material objects. Kama is not just the acquisition, but the enjoyment of material objects. Dharma, which is acquisition and enjoyment of material objects within an ethical framework. And lastly, moksha, which is spiritual liberation. And such moksha is conceptualized differently by different philosophical schools. So we have a dual classification of the Trivarga and the Apavarga, a distinction of Trivarga and Apavarga. So Artha, Kama and Dharma come within the group of Trivarga, and Moksha is also called as Apavarga. And this distinction is based on the distinction between matter and transcendence of matter. Whereas Artha, Kama and Dharma are related to the material world, Moksha is to do with transcendence of matter. And transcending matter and being established in absolute reality as conceptualized by different philosophical schools. So it could be either Purusha, or it could be Atma, it could be Chaitanya, or it could be Samvit, as the Kashmiri monastic Shaivites would have, or even Shunya, as the Buddhists would call. So whatever it might be. So what Apavarga basically refers to is transcending matter and being established in some absolute reality. So coming to the next slide. So we have been speaking about Vyutpatti. Is there any clue at all in Natya Shastra also about Vyutpatti? Does Vyutpatti? We know Bharata devotes two entire chapters to Rasa and Bhava. But what does Bharata say about Vyutpatti itself? So Bharata doesn't use the word Vyutpatti, but he uses a synonymous word, Upadesha, which is instruction. And in several places, especially in the first chapter itself, he uses the word Upadesha. He in one place he uses the compound Hitopadesha Janana. So while describing the nature of Natya, he calls Natya as Hitopadesha Janana. And what is Hitopadesha Janana? Hita Upadesha Janana, that which provides instruction about what is conducive to welfare. And in another verse, he calls Natya as Lokopadesha Janana. So which translates to providing instruction on worldly actions. So Natya is both Hitopadesha Janana as well as Lokopadesha Janana. And through these compounds that describe Natya, Bharata brings to our attention the educational aspect of drama. Abhinav Gupta, as I told, has written a commentary on Bharata's Natya Shastra. He lived in the 10th century. And in this commentary, which is called as Abhinav Bharati, he, while elucidating the word Lokopadesha Janana, he adds something. He says, drama provides instruction on the aggregate of means required to accomplish the fourfold goals. So, Dharmadi Upaya Varge Upadeshakari. Dharmadi means dharma and etc. Dharma, artha, kama and moksha. Their upaya, that is the means required to accomplish them. And varga, that is the aggregate of all these means. Upadeshakari, it gives us instruction. Natya gives us instruction on dharma and the other life goals, as well as the means of accomplishing them, means to accomplish them. Elsewhere, Bharata uses the word dharmya, and commenting on that word, what Abhinav Gupta says is, he remarks that drama is a tool for the accomplishment of all the fourfold goals, not just dharma, as the literal meaning of the word would suggest. So the word dharma, dharmya, doesn't just mean that which is related to dharma, but that which is related to all the fourfold goals. This is Abhinav Gupta makes it clear that the word dharmya refers not just to dharma, but to all the goals. So dharma shabdena chatvaropi purushartaha swikritaha. So by the word dharma, Bharata is actually conveying all the four purushartas. Teshu sadhu sadhakam, that which is a tool for accomplishing them, is dharmya. So Natya is dharmya, and dharmya means a tool, that is a tool for accomplishing all the four life goals. And why is it a tool? It is a tool because it instructs us through its different forms. And different forms of Natya are basically the Dasharupakas, the 10 main types of drama. There are also several Uparupakas, but here the most important types of drama are the 10 dramas. Most important type of dramas when it comes to imparting knowledge of the life goals are the Dasharupakas, the 10 major types of drama. So what does it instruct us? It instructs us through its various forms, through its different types, about the means for accomplishing the fourfold life goals. Purushartha Chatushtayopayaihi Dasharupakaihi Upetam. So, and he also says Chaturvargopaya Pradarshakam. So it shows us, it teaches us about the upaya for the 4 vargas. Later, we have Bhoja, a polymath king who has written on several subjects, including aesthetics from the 11th century. He, in one place, he says, Vidhi Nisheda Vyutpatti Phalatvat Prabandhanam. So literature imparts the knowledge of do's and don'ts. And by saying this, Bhoja is actually alluding to the appropriate means, alluding to the fact that literature gives us knowledge about the appropriate means for accomplishing the life goals. So by using the word Vidhi and Nisheda. So coming to the next slide. Yeah. So why is drama effective as a pedagogical tool? So what is so special about drama that it is a effective pedagogical tool? So we get some points on this from Abhinav Gupta. So these points are scattered in the first chapter, but I have collated these points in one place. So these are the various points that Abhinav Gupta provides when he is discussing about the effectiveness of literature as a pedagogical tool. Firstly, through this medium, people who are unexposed to scriptural deliberations can acquire the ability to confidently distinguish between right and wrong actions. So Ashruta Shastranam, those who have never heard about the Shastras, or those who are unexposed to scriptural deliberations, Avichala Karya Akarya Viveka Siddhi. Avichala is confident ability to distinguish between Karya, that is right, and Akarya, that is wrong action. Viveka is the ability to distinguish. Siddhi is the acquisition. So through this medium, people acquire this ability to confidently distinguish. And why confidently distinguish? This will be explained in the slides that follow. So the second point is literature imparts the knowledge of life goals in an aesthetically pleasing way that is not intellectually taxing on the connoisseur. And what sort of connoisseur? A connoisseur who might be apprehensive about directly engaging with the scriptures to obtain such knowledge. And this is akin to making a patient enjoy the benefit of a bitter drug by mixing it in sweet milk. So Abhinav Gupta says, Sarvo Janaha Sarasa Sukumara Anurajya Dashayah Tad Upabhoga Anantariya Kataya Eva Karya Akarya Jnanamapi Upayunkte Kshira Madhya Avasthita Aushadha Upayogavat. So Kshira Madhya Avasthita Aushadha Upayogavat means similar to the benefit of a bitter drug by mixing it in sweet milk. And such people who do not want to directly engage with scriptures, who do not want to tax their minds by engaging directly with scriptures, Abhinav Gupta calls them as Sukumaras. Some elsewhere they are also called as Sukumaramati. Sukumaranam Vyutpattidai Natyam. So Sukumara basically refers to people who do not want to intellectually tax their minds by directly engaging with scriptures. Veda Shastra Purana Bhiru Hridayasya. Bhiru is basically one who is afraid of the Vedas, of the Shastras and the Puranas, because they are too difficult for him to comprehend. Even for such people, what is Natya? Natya is Pumarthopaya Avagatim Karoti. It makes them realize the means for acquiring the four goals. So coming to the next point. What else does Natya do? it motivates people to volitionally engage themselves with the rightful realization of life goals. By volitionally, it means without forcing it upon them. So, tadru upayo nirupyo yena swayam esham bhavati pravritti. Swayam pravritti. That is volitional engagement. Tacha natyameva. And that such an upaya, a means by which people volitionally engage with the rightful realization of life goals is only natya. Tacha natyameva. That is possible only through natya. So that is the third point. The fourth point is the knowledge of right and wrong actions that is imparted by drama carries a greater conviction. So, as I was alluding in the first point, you have the word avichala, confident. Where does that confidence come from? Because drama simulates direct perception. So the knowledge of right and wrong actions that is imparted by drama carries a greater conviction, and it gives the connoisseurs greater confidence, because drama simulates direct perception. And direct perception, as we know, is the most valid means of knowledge. So we have various valid means of knowledge like pratyaksha, anumana, upamana, and aptavakya, etc. So of all these, the most valid means of knowledge is pratyaksha, or direct perception. And what does drama do? It simulates direct perception. And we know that pratyaksha is the pramana on which all other pramanas depend. So knowledge from all other pramanas, it may be inference, or it may be upamana, or it may be aptavakya, etc. The knowledge that is obtained from all these other valid means of knowledge rests basically on pratyaksha. And drama simulates pratyaksha. Drama simulates direct perception. And therefore, because it simulates direct perception, there is a greater conviction and greater confidence that occurs from such from the knowledge that is got, knowledge of the purusharthas that is got by watching a play or by reading a Mahakavya. So the fifth point is drama scores even over direct perception. So in the fourth point, Abhinav Gupta says that drama is like direct perception. It simulates direct perception. But elsewhere he says that it scores even over direct perception. Why? Because it simulates not just the direct perception of actions, but also the good and bad fruits of such actions. And it does so within a matter of a few hours or a days. For example, a dramatic character is shown not just to perform a scripturally enjoined sacrifice. So somewhere, for example, Yudhishthira might be shown as performing a particular sacrifice, maybe described as performing or some other king might be described as performing certain sacrifice. And the fruits that accrue from performing, the good fruits that accrue from performing those sacrifices are shown immediately within a matter of a few hours. For example, he does this sacrifice, and after a few hours, it is shown that he is ascending heaven. And the audience immediately makes a connection between performance of this action and the fruit of ascending to heaven. So this, the fruits of action, the good or bad fruits of actions are also shown within a matter of a few hours or days. And this is something which is even in real life, even at the time of our death, we may not be aware of the fruits of our past actions, but drama in front of our very eyes within a few hours shows us about the fruits of past actions. So this is what he says here: sarvesham karmanam kriyamananam anu means after, anu paschat achireneva, within a short duration, achireneva kalena, within a short duration, darshakam panchashadibireva divasaihi, within 5 or 6 days, shubha shubha karma tat phala sambandha sakshatkara. So it tells us about the good or bad fruits that accrued from past actions. And therefore drama is called as anukirtana and not as anukarana. Anukarana is imitation, but Bharata uses the word, he does not say that drama is an imitation of everyday. Is not an imitation of the mundane world. It is anukirtana. It is an exalted imitation. Why? If we were to imitate the mundane world, then the drama would carry on for several days, as long as a lifetime. But what we do in drama is just to take those aspects of life that are important for producing rasa. To give a very simplistic example, characters such as Krishna, we know that in real life Krishna must have bathed every day, must have eaten every day, and done all these mundane activities. But those activities are not shown on the stage. It is not shown that he is daily bathing and daily eating, etc., because those activities are not necessary for the production of rasa. So all those things are removed, and only the essence of that person's life is shown on the stage, and therefore that is called as anukirtana and not just anukarana or anukriti of everyday life. So this is the fifth point. So coming to the next question, the second question that we asked was, how is Vyutpatti produced? How do we actually learn what we learn from drama? So here there is it's important to know that there is this centrality of primary characters. By primary characters is meant the hero and the heroine, especially the hero. And the hero is basically central in imparting the knowledge of life goals. And Sanskrit aestheticians, since these 2 millennia, have basically understood 4 classes of heroes. We also have similar classes of heroines. With respect to heroes, we have Uddhata, Lalita, Udatta, and Shanta. Sometimes the word Dhira is also prefixed, and we call them Dhiroddata, Dhira Lalita, Dhiroddata, and Dhira Shanta. And for the sake of this talk, we'll just take them as Uddhata, Lalita, Udatta, and Shanta. Abhinav Gupta makes a comment in the first chapter of Natya Shastra in his commentary. Different classes of heroes are shown as pursuing objects congruent to their life goals, after ensuring that the aggregate of means necessary for such a pursuit is readily accessible. So heroes pursue after ensuring that the necessary means are there. They pursue their life goals, or they are shown as pursuing their life goals after ensuring that the means that are necessary for such pursuit are accessible. And because they do so, their actions bear fruit. Alternatively, the actions of anti-heroes do not bear fruit because these are characters which lack in the aggregate of means. So they have a life goal, but they do not have the means to achieve those life goals. On the other hand, the hero or the primary characters have the means to achieve their life goals. So Purnopaya Pravrittatvena, Purna Upaya, the aggregate of all the upayas, Pravrittatvena, they engage, they perform certain actions after ensuring that there is Purna Upaya, all upayas are present. Purnopaya Pravrittatvena Nayakanam, so the Nayakas do so. Atadru Upaya Ashrayena Pratinayakana. So Pratinayaka, that is the anti-heroes, Atadru Upaya Ashrayena, they do not have these upayas. So Pratinayakanam Chacharitam Saphala Apalatvena. So Saphala is fruitful with the respect of with respect to Nayaka, and Aphala, that is, it does not bear fruit. It becomes futile in the case of Pratinayaka. Sakshat Kriyamanam. It is shown as if this is actually happening in front of our eyes, as if certain people are carrying on with are pursuing their life goals after ensuring certain means, and certain other people are seen as are shown in front of us in drama as pursuing certain life goals without ensuring that the means are there. So Bhoja, let us go to Bhoja. Bhoja has a very sophisticated theory of mental states, and which he discusses in Shringara Prakasha. The elements of this theory are scattered again here and there. So they are not given on a platter. So one has to bring these elements together and create a theory out of it. So Bhoja's sophisticated theory of mental states brings out the interrelationship between character personality, life goals, and experience of mental states. And experience of mental states, I mean both pleasurable as well as displeasurable mental states, Sukha Pradana and Dukkha Pradana bhavas. So coming to the next slide. I'll not go deeply into Bhoja's theory because I have in several other lectures detailed that. Here I'll just give a brief overview. What Bhoja does is to link each personality type. So we know that there are 4 personalities: Uddhata, Lalita, Udatta, and Shanta. Bhoja links these personalities with specific life goals. So you have Uddhata pursuing the life goal of Artha, which is acquisition of material objects. Lalita pursuing the life goal of Kama, which is enjoyment of material objects. The Udatta pursuing Dharma, which is acquiring unseen merit or Punya by performing ethical actions in the course of acquiring and enjoying material objects. And we have Shanta, who pursues the life goal of Moksha, which is eternal freedom from the world of matter. So Bhoja's ingenuity lies in linking these personalities with various life goals, which other aestheticians have not done. So they just have mentioned these personalities and discussed their traits, but they have not linked these personalities with life goal. And that is what Bhoja does in his Sringara Prakasha. So these goals are not for mutually unrelated goals, but these are goals that are placed on a hierarchy. So you could place these goals on a hierarchy with Artha lowest and Moksha, it's missing in this slide, Moksha being the highest. So what is the basis for this hierarchy? The basis is basically experiential. So as one progresses from being an Artha dominant to a Moksha dominant individual, one's experience of Dukkhatmaka or Dukkha Pradhana mental states tends towards zero. So as you progress from being an Artha dominant towards a Moksha dominant individual, your experience of displeasurable mental states tends towards zero. And by a Moksha dominant individual or a Shanta a character, what is meant is not a person who has achieved moksha, but who is in the process of achieving moksha. Because a person who has achieved moksha cannot be depicted as a character either in a kavya or on a stage, because such a character is not supposed to perform any action, because there is no interaction of such a person with the material world. And because there is no interaction with the material world, there are no actions performed directed at the material world. And such a person cannot be, obviously, a person who doesn't act at all cannot be shown either on the stage or be described in the Mahakavya. So when you say Shanta, it means a person who is on the verge of attaining moksha. So each personality type is endowed with a set of traits, which other aestheticians have also discussed, but Bhoja has discussed in length about these traits. So each personality is endowed with a set of traits. And why are these traits necessary? These traits are necessary in order to achieve their specific life goals. So if it is Uddhata, the specific life goal that he has to attain is Artha, and he has certain traits that help him attain the life goal of Artha. So we could say that traits are the means par excellence for realizing a life goal. And these are like the paraphernalia in life's journey towards fulfilling certain ends. So you have a hero personality type, the hero being endowed with certain traits and certain actions being facilitated by these traits, and certain life goals being achieved through those actions. So coming to the next slide. So Bhoja describes 3 classes of traits. You have 24 commonly shared or samanya traits. Then you have 8 unique traits or vishesha traits for each personality type, and 16 differentiating traits. So totally we have 24 plus 8 into 4 for each of the personalities, and 16 into 4 for each of the personality, and totally we have 120 traits that are described by Bhoja. Of all these traits, so when you say commonly shared traits, so to give an example, to make this clear, what do you mean by commonly shared unique traits and differentiating traits? Suppose there are 2 characters A and B pursuing certain goals. So when you say commonly shared traits, what the commonly shared trait tells us is the extent to which A and B are similar to one another. Traits tell about how they are unique in themselves. So a particular unique trait would say how A is unique in himself or B is unique in himself. And the differentiating traits tell about how A and B are mutually different. How A differs from B and B differs from A. So we have these 120 traits. And of all these traits, the most important traits are the 24 commonly shared traits. And why these traits are important? Because all these traits are positive traits. And And we know that there is a hierarchy of these characters. So depending upon the difficulty in which a particular goal is, the difficulty with which a particular goal can be achieved. So Artha is less difficult than Kama. Uh, Kama is less difficult to achieve than Dharma. Dharma is less difficult to achieve than Moksha. So the positive traits are also similarly distributed. So the Artha individual has fewer positive traits. The Kama individual has more positive traits than the Artha. The Dharma and the Moksha individuals have the entire set of 24 commonly shared traits. So you have Artha having 12 to 18 commonly shared traits. The Kama dominant individual having 18 to 20, and the Dharma and Moksha individuals having all the 24 commonly shared traits. Then you might ask me, how are Dharma and Moksha individuals different from one another? They can be distinguished because of their unique traits. Though they have all the 24 commonly shared traits, they are still different because of their unique traits. So to give an idea of these traits, so you have these 24 commonly shared traits, and Bhoja gives, in fact, two examples for each of these traits. He culls out examples from literature and gives under each of these headings. So when he's, for example, discussing exalted birth, you can go to the previous slide itself. So when he's, for example, discussing about exalted birth, he would give two examples from literature to show that a particular character is of exalted birth. Similarly, to illustrate skill, to illustrate artistic aptitude, etc., he gives two examples. Coming to the next slide. So what are these, how do these traits actually function with respect to a work of literature? So what is the relationship between these traits and literary work in front of us? So what literature does is to describe the primary characters as performing certain actions through which some of these above mentioned traits can be inferred. So the traits can only be inferred. For example, Kala Vaidagya, artistic aptitude, can only be inferred. These traits can only be inferred. And how they can be inferred? They can be inferred by certain actions that are performed by those characters. So literature basically brings in situations where these various traits, these 24 commonly shared traits, can be inferred by the audience. So in the process of enjoying a play or a poem, the audience is educated by the hero about these life goals, not just about life goals, but about the objects that are goal congruent, that are congruent to his or her life goal, the rightful actions through which such objects can be secured, and finally about the traits that facilitate the actions. In one of the points, previous points, I had mentioned how the knowledge of life goals is imparted only through the primary characters. And coming back to that, why is it so? Why is the knowledge of life goals imparted only through the primary characters? Because the primary characters have fixed life goals. A primary character such as Rama must always be described as, at least in the Indian tradition, must always be described as having a fixed life goal. If he is an Udatta character pursuing Dharma, he must be described as a Udatta character throughout the particular drama, throughout a particular Mahakavya. You cannot show Rama as being Udatta at one time, Lalita at another time, and Uddhata at some other time, and Shanta in elsewhere. So you cannot show Rama as pursuing Dharma at one time, Kama at another time, etc. You should show Rama, who is the primary character, as pursuing a single life goal throughout the literary work. However, so these, you could call these primary characters as possibilities because these are not met within real life. They are like prototypical. They are prototypical and they are never seen in real life. On the other hand, liberties can be taken with secondary characters like Parashurama. These secondary characters are more like everyday individuals. So that is why Dhanika makes this remark. He says, Anginastu Ramadehe Arambhopatta Avasthato Avasthantaropadanam Anyayam. So a character, Arambhopatta Avastha, the state which we have selected in the beginning of the work. For example, you want to portray Rama as Udatta. So avasthantara, that is depicting him as somebody else. as having gone into a different state, a state of Lalita, etc., is anyaya. It is not correct. On the other hand, nacha avasthantarabhidanam anuchitam angabhuta nayakana. With respect to secondary characters, angabhuta, that is secondary nayakas, secondary characters like Parashurama, avasthantara abhidanam na anuchitam. So you can take liberties with secondary characters. You can show Parashurama as being Udatta at some time and Uddhata at some other point, etc. So in that sense, the secondary characters are those with flexible personalities. But the flexibility comes with there is a negative side to that flexibility. Because they are flexible, they cannot provide us comprehensive knowledge about one specific life goal. On the other hand, though primary characters are fixed, they are not flexible like the secondary characters. They can still provide us comprehensive knowledge about one particular life goal. So this importance of hero in imparting knowledge about life goals is also linked to the positive injunction against a tragic ending. So there is a positive injunction in Sanskrit aesthetics or Indian aesthetics that the hero should never be shown as dying. The drama should never end on a tragic note. Why? Because the hero is very important in imparting knowledge about life goals. And if the hero himself is shown as dying without achieving his life goal, it sends a wrong message to the audience that life has no purpose. In spite of learning about the Purusharthas, in spite of learning about the means through which the Purusharthas can be achieved, finally, all this is meaningless. That is what would be the message sent if the drama ends on a tragic note. And therefore, you have this positive injunction against showing the character hero as dying. So, coming to the next slide. This is an important point we need to discuss, the relationship between rasa and vyutpatti. So it's often been discussed as if rasa and vyutpatti are two different things, unrelated to one another. And therefore, vyutpatti is given a second position and rasa is often extolled in comparison to vyutpatti. But is it so? Is there a relationship between the two aspects of literature, the educational and the educational aspect and the entertaining aspect of literature? So, in fact, the two Abhinav Gupta himself makes this claim that the two are not different. So he says in his commentary on Dhvanyaloka, nacha ete priti vyutpatti bhinna rupe eva dvayoho api eka vishayatvat. The two, by two, what is meant is priti and vyutpatti. Priti is a synonym for rasa. So rasa and vyutpatti bhinna rupe na, they are not fundamentally different. Why? Eka vishayatvat, because they stem from the same source. And what is the source? The same literary work. The same literary work gives us rasa as well as vyutpatti. And because they stem from the same literary work, they are not fundamentally different. There is also another point. Dhananjaya defines drama, natya, as avasthanukritihi natyam. It is a simulation of the states that are specific to the different types of heroes. Avastha means the avastha of the nayakas. So the states that are specific to different types of heroes, that is the Udatta state, the Lalita state, the Uddhata state, and the Shanta state. So drama, natya, is a simulation of these states. So avasthayaha anukriti, the simulation. And we know that evocation of rasa is a primary goal of drama. So combining these two, we can derive this. What we can derive is, unless the simulation is perfect, literature ceases to be literature. So if literature has to be literature, drama has to be drama, there should be simulation. And if there is no simulation, literature is not literature, and it does not produce its effect of rasa. So for simulation to be perfect, the hero must be correctly depicted as pursuing goals specific to him through appropriate means. So unless the hero is correctly described as a Uddhata or Udatta, etc., and correctly described as Uddhata means correctly described as somebody who is pursuing the life goal of Artha, correctly describing Udatta character as pursuing the life goal of Dharma, unless that simulation is perfect, there is no rasa. So in this way, actually, the rasa aspect of Natya as well as the Vyutpatti aspect of Natya go hand in hand together. Unless there is Vyutpatti, there is no rasa. So the conclusion is, unless the knowledge of life goals and the rightful pursuit is made an integral part of a literary work, the literary work will fail to evoke joy in the reader. So unless you take care of life goals and their right pursuit and describe them through a work of art, the work of art will fail on both accounts. It will neither produce Vyutpatti, and because it does not produce Vyutpatti, it will also not produce rasa. Because if it does not produce Vyutpatti, it will not be a correct simulation of the states of those characters. And if it is not a correct simulation of states of those characters, it will fail to be literature. And if it fails to be literature, it will again fail to produce rasa. So with this slide, I end my talk. I am thankful to NIA CSP team, Sangeeta ma'am, as well as to Niharika and Meera, Abhishek for designing the poster, and Ashwini. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, sir. Now the floor is open for comments, questions, and discussion. So if anyone has a question, they can type it out on the chat box, or they can write it. They can raise their hands, and I'll quickly unmute them. Meera, do you have a question?
So I will actually club the question and comment everything together. It was really a great answer. It is a pleasure having heard all these details about how Vidpati and Rasa has been conceptualized and how different characters have so much to contribute to drama, which is not something that we usually understand just while watching it. And one question that I had was, is the knowledge that you meant in terms of Vyutpatti really necessary for rasa to come through? I know that you did mention that knowledge somehow goes together with inducing rasa, but do we really need a literary understanding to for rasa to happen? That is one question that I had. And if we extend that for any phenomenological experience to happen, for any experience to happen, do we need a linguistic understanding that presupposes it or that goes before it? So this is one question that I had.
Yeah. So rather than, I think I would frame the question a little differently. Rather than saying whether it is needed, whether Vyutpatti is needed actually for the rasa experience, I would say that the two are so intertwined that they cannot be separated at all. Can they be separated at all is the question, rather than whether it is needed. So it is, as Abhinav Gupta mentioned, he gave the example of how it is like mixing sugar in a sugar in a aushadha, in a drug, and obviously you would get the benefit of the drug also. So you cannot separate the benefit of drug and just enjoy the sweetness. The benefit of the drug is intertwined with that sweetness. So you cannot actually separate the two. That would be my.
So, sir, just to confirm, if we were to listen to music, we would say that lyrics might not be extremely important for somebody to understand the rasa of the music. Similarly, is that the same case in drama also? Like, that is what I was asking, whether the experience of rasa can still sustain without, uh, the linguistic or the literary part being there.
Okay, so see, I'm not sure whether you can compare music 100% with drama. So the linguistic aspect of drama is much more pronounced than that of music. So the music probably has the paramount goal of giving that experience of rasa. without even a need for education about the life goals. But then that I think would not be possible with literature. So in literature is not like music. That is what I feel. Though both give rasa, one may not give Vyutpati, but the other Vyutpati in the sense Vyutpati of the life goals. While literature, you cannot actually separate Vyutpati from rasa.
Okay. So I do see many questions here, but if I could make one more brief question as an extension to this, we listen to Panchatantra stories and all these stories which actually kind of dump things down for children and people at large. In these stories also these larger life goals, dharma, artha, kama, moksha, all these things get inculcated in us in a very simpler fashion. So I was wondering, do we need to have an understanding of these goals? This is the same question in a different way. Do we need an understanding of these goals in order to pursue them? Would people who do not have an understanding of these goals still pursue them? Is it possible?
Mm-hmm. So see, the first part of your question, there is a difference between katha and kavya. So katha is different than kavya, and this is something which Abhinav Gupta himself makes clear in the first chapter of Natya Shastra itself. He differentiates between katha and kavya. Katha is katha is he compares it to a proverb like. So the end of a katha is in the form of a simple proverb, with not much importance paid to delineation, description, etc. While I think drama does it in a much more thicker fashion, including all descriptions. It's a much thicker way of telling things than katha. Katha, as you said, it just brings down for the sake of the listener, and often tells the message in the form of in a short proverb, and that is not what kavya does. Kavya or natya does. And the second part of your question, can you just repeat it?
The second part was, is it possible to have an understanding and a pursuit of Purusharthas, for instance, without having known these stories or heard them? Like, do you need that concept to have the experience?
Yeah. So see, it is not necessary. So that is why Abhinav Gupta says that this is for a specific type of people who are Sukumara. Sukumaramati, who are afraid to actually go through the Shastras, or afraid to get this knowledge directly from any other source, who do not want to tax their minds with a lot of Shastric learning. And he says that this is not just for Sukumaramatis, though Sukumaramatis are in fact helped by it. He says that this is common for both Sukumara and Nishitamatis also, for those who are of strong intellect and those of weak intellect also. So it is not that it is surely there may be people who do not need the support of drama in order to understand about these purusharthas, but majority of the people I think cannot access the shastras, cannot access this knowledge directly, and for them this is a very easy means to inculcate the knowledge of purusharthas.
Thank you so much, Meera. Meera is also the chairperson of today's talk. She's a doctoral scholar with our team. And thank you, Shankar sir, for the wonderful answers. Sundaram Ramachandran has a question, and he followed it with a couple of comments along with Narasimha Murthy sir. So, yeah, his question is that another purpose, would you say that another purpose could be to provide psychological insight into the human psychic?
Okay. Yeah, so that I think would be part of the Vyutpati itself. So you need not put it as a separate it is not necessary that you invent a different category other than Vyutpatti in order to put this knowledge about the knowledge of the human psyche that we get from drama. You need not put it in another box which is other than Vyutpatti. I think you could include it in Vyutpatti itself.
Okay, thank you, sir. Murthy sir, do you have any comments that or?
Yeah, like my only question is like, anyway, congrats, it's a great talk. At one point of time, like we said, like drama or natya, like it is intellectually less taxing, which I agree. This also means like our reason or the discriminative thing is also like it's also vulnerable. Like we don't have to be, we don't have to reason better. So this means like it is, the misunderstanding is also greater, right? Of course, we have a lot of advantages through drama, natya, and all those things. But when we are not using our intelligence or the reason, like the misinterpretations, there is a chances of misinterpreting natya drama, right? So I thought, so how the aesthetics or Indian aesthetics answer this issue.
So misinterpretation, for example, misinterpreting the pursuit of a particular goal. For example, showing something which is not a means for a certain goal as a means for the certain goal, or showing showing a wrong pursuit of certain goals, etc., can happen. That's what you are telling. And how do we guard against this? What does Indian aesthetics have to tell about misrepresentation of these life goals or the means for achieving these life goals? So what Indian aesthetics says is that if there is such misinterpretation, that would fall under the category of what we call as anauchitya or impropriety. So if there is anauchitya, and auchitya is considered to be the in fact, Anandavardhana calls auchitya as the Upanishad of rasa. That is, the secret of rasa itself lies in auchitya, in propriety. And if you do not follow propriety and show things in an improper way, then that would spoil the rasa experience of the audience. So if there is anauchitya, misinterpretation, literature will not fulfill its purpose of producing rasa. So
thank you.
Misinterpretation would go under the category of anauchitya.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Shankar sir. The next question is by Asha Kumari. Ma'am, are you here? I'll just read out her question. How literature helps us in knowing about society, economy, culture of any particular era?
Of knowing about
society, economy, or culture about any particular era.
So this obviously, people who have read literary works know that those literary works tell about the people of those times, the actions they used to do, the means, how they would pursue particular goals, what are the objects that they would pursue, etc. Obviously, we know that literature does give us information, and in fact, that this is one of the important responsibilities of a poet, that he or she should actually depict the conditions of the time in which his character lived in as correctly possible way as it is possible for him. So that would be, again, that is called as auchitya. So just as we have anauchitya, there is auchitya, and there is the auchitya of kala, desha, prakriti, etc. So the poet or the author should stick to what is proper for the character's time, place, and his personality. So when he's sticking to this auchitya, obviously he will allude to the situations of those times, and through those we can get the knowledge of say economic conditions or whatever knowledge that the poet wants to convey.
Thank you, sir. We'll quickly take Vinod sir's question, followed by Arjun Singh's question, and also Saurabh sir's question. Vinod sir, please.
Yeah, so thank you, Raja Raman sir, for such an enlightening session. I'm from management area and I pursue interdisciplinary studies. And I like attending NIAS CSP session. So I joined this session and slightly late. Yeah, so what I understood is like say text or language and natya. So these can have different kind of say positive points to learn and to express knowledge. And I would like to explore more on this. So if you could suggest some sources which we can refer to study on our own on these topics.
Okay.
Thank you.
On this topic of how literature is a source of knowledge.
Yes, sir. And about Natya and so like many times we find that in ancient Indian text, there could be different interpretation by different authors. So now rather than me looking for different kind of authors, if you suggest some say good sources, then I can directly start from that. So
Okay.
that
See, I usually refer to primary Sanskrit sources themselves with their commentaries. So usually don't go to secondary sources, but I'll find out and contact and later give you the details, sir. You can contact me. Okay.
Thank
Specific texts, I'll let you know, because I usually go into original texts such as Natya Shastra or Shringara Prakasha, which I alluded to, is never been translated into any language. So it's available only in Sanskrit, and it's a very voluminous text. And thankfully, I was able to access it because of my knowledge of Sanskrit. But then, as regards secondary literature on these topics, I will provide you a list, sir. If you can contact me later.
yeah, sure, sir. And I started learning Sanskrita, but it may take little time to understand the text. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vinod sir. Yeah, Mr. Arjun, are you here with us? Okay. I'll quickly request Saurabh sir to proceed with this question, and we'll take Arjun sir's questions next.
Thank you, Niharika. So thanks, Dr. Shankar, for this fascinating talk. It's been illuminating, and I look forward to learn more about this. But one is this interesting aspect about Vyatpatti or education. It is also we find its parallel or resonance in the German philosophy, German aesthetics tradition also, because Gadamer talks about the German word which is called as a Bildung, which is in English translated as uh, edification or education. So he says that basically the aim of the art basically is this edification or edification, and why? Because whenever we so he moves away from the tradition of a pleasure or like of Kant, because he says there is the primacy of pleasure here, pleasure there. What is he says the central in any aesthetic kind of the performance is basically the interpretation or understanding, because we are the finite creature, and whenever we see these kind of the performances, so we get illuminated, we get more clear about our own existence or our own self, which in turn which he says that the moment of the Bildung, edification. So that is why more than the pleasure, subjective pleasure, he said this is what this Bildung which make the art or literature drama more fascinating. So that's what I wish to. What is your opinion on that?
So sorry, I'm not an expert on your subject, but then when you say that it makes us more aware of ourselves and our situation, I don't know, but I'm forced to think in the way of Bhoja, that when you say think of ourselves, is it like think of ourselves as beings pursuing certain goals?
Yes, yes, yes.
So maybe, I mean, I don't know whether that is what is the interpretation in from a phenomenological point of view, but from an Indian point of view, when it gives us, when it makes us introspect about our own situation, I would like to think that it makes us introspect about it makes us introspect about our own situation as people pursuing certain life goals.
Yeah. So exactly, because in Western tradition, especially in this like Greek or like German tradition, they don't talk about these fourfold goals like the Chaturvarg, but they talk about the Bildung like culture, that edification of the consciousness is the goal. So that is why they say the art and the theater, they actually help us to pursue the Bildung.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Saurabh sir. Thank you, Shankar sir. As we're running a little short of time, we'll take one last question by Mr. Arjun Singh. I'll quickly read out his question to you, sir. Namaste, sir. Nowadays, movies are made with an aim to promote or propagate certain ideologies, loaded messages, and unpleasant scenes are shown to invoke outrage among the audience. And such movies are hailed as good, meaningful movies because they convey certain message, even if they may not invoke they may not invoke rasa or aesthetic delight. Wouldn't such movies be categorized as having doshas?
Yeah, I would say from an Indian aesthetic point of view that these carry the dosha of anaujitya, and because of anaujitya, what is produced is not rasa, but short of rasa, it is in the form of bhava, and therefore these various personal emotions of anger, fear, etc., are invoked in the audience rather than the piece of rasa. It is the it is the disturbance of the bhava that is invoked in the audience, and I would say that they would carry the dosha of anauchitya. So yeah, and yeah, that's what.
With that, we would conclude our question and answer session. Meera Kumar Menon will be opening up the WhatsApp groups for you. You can ask further questions there. Shankar sir would be active in some time and would be able to reply to your messages. And also, with sir's permission, we might share his email address if you want to personally connect with him. So thank you so much everyone for joining today's lecture, and a very special thank to Dr. Shankar Rajaraman, a gem, as Meera said, for our team CSP. Thank you, sir, for accepting the invitation and being a speaker for us today. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening. We'll see you next Friday with a new lecture. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.